Hi, American Lit students. For our next assignment, we are going to be having to write an essay. And we're going to be reading the text From What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. And while we read this text, we are going to have to decide if Frederick Douglass is a patriot. Now, first you need to know what a patriot is. And it does tell us in assignment 8, the one we're working on, that a patriot is a person who vigorously supports their country and is prepared to defend it against enemies or detractors. So a patriot is someone who supports their country and is willing to defend their country. So we have to decide if we think Frederick Douglass is a patriot based on the text we are going to be reading. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we are going to start reading. So this text is on page 289. Please open your books to page 289. Get a pen or a pencil ready because we are going to be annotating. So the title of this text is From What to the Slave is the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. And let's look at the background. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass addressed an audience at the Rochester, New York Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society. At a time when many people, some who were against slavery in principle, viewed the total abolition of slavery as a radical cause, Douglass pulled no punches in pleading his case. So just to give you a little bit more background, if you remember back to when we read the Declaration of Independence, this document was what was written when we declared independence. And on Independence Day, we are celebrating the creation and the declaration of this document. And remember, one of the most famous lines in this document is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, driving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Okay, and then it keeps going, basically saying that if anyone believes that their government becomes destructive of these ends, then it's a right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government. So what Frederick Douglass is going to talk about in his speech is how can slaves support Independence Day when the United States of America says that independence and liberty, meaning freedom, is extended to all people, that it's extended to all men. How can a slave accept this when they are being enslaved and when freedom is not being extended to them? And this is what he is going to speak about in this text. So he says, "Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessing resulting from your independence to us?" So he is saying, why are you wanting me to speak on Independence Day? Why are you wanting me to help you celebrate your independence? because I'm a Black man and I'm not independent. I'm sorry, but you may have freedom, but I don't. Your Declaration of Independence may grant you freedom, but it doesn't grant us freedom. It does not grant the, I'm not Black, but the Black American freedom. So let's underline this sentence because I think it's important. So he's saying, are those freedoms, the justice that is written in that Declaration of Independence that we celebrate on Independence Day, is it extended to us Black Americans? No. He's speaking at a time when slavery still exists. He himself was a slave, and now he is not. So he is someone who can speak to the horrors of slavery. Paragraph 2. Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these answers. So he's saying you couldn't say yes to any of these. You can't say yes, that freedom is extended to us. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful? So he's saying if you could say yes to any of these, then it would be easy for me to give this speech. But instead, it's not. It's not easy for me to give this speech, and I'm not going to be easy or delightful today when I give this speech. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who's so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee? When the chains of servitude had been torn, his limbs. I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man leap as an art. So he's saying, I am not someone as a free slave who's going to say, oh, yay, now I'm free, and our people are free. He's not going to say that. Paragraph 3. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. So disparity means that they're not treated equal. White Americans and Black Americans are not treated equal. Remember, the beginning of the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. So he's like, nope, there's a disparity between us. We're not all created equal, especially in the eyes of a white person. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. So everyone doesn't enjoy these blessings. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems, where inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean citizens to mock me by asking me to speak today? So he's saying that to drag a man in chains and say, oh, look, let's celebrate our independence. He's like, are you playing a joke on me to think that I have the same independence that you have? Is this a joke? Because it's not funny. I don't have the same independence that you have. Are you kidding? This is what he's saying here. So let's underline this line because I think this is a really key line here. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence. Bequeathed means handed down by your fathers, is shared by you, not me. So let's put on the side a little summary of this, because this is a really important point. Black Americans do not share the same justice, liberty, or prosperity. Prosperity means like wealth, jobs, as white Americans. So it's not all Americans that have independence. To say that a Black American has independence, even a freed Black American, one that used to be a slave, does not have the same independence as a white American. Let's go to paragraph 4. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reach them. So he's saying that for a slave, when they hear you shouting and celebrating independence, that slave is like, oh, must be nice for you to be independent. Sucks for me to be in these chains. I guess it's fun for you to have independence. What about us over here in our chains? Hello. If I do forget, if I do not faithfully remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning, and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day in its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Standing there, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and the bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, enslaved, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce means to reject, with all emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just. So there's a lot there. Let's unpack some of it. He is saying that he is going to speak from the point of view of a slave. So he's going to speak from the point of view as a slave, and he's going to say that, you know what, this America that you celebrate is not a good America. This America that you celebrate is not a just America. This America that you celebrate is hideous and revolting. It's false. It's false. He repeats the word false. America is false. And then he says, this is my favorite quote in this paragraph, standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered. Liberty means freedom, and he's saying fettered mean like chained. In the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the greatest sin and shame of America. So he's saying, with all the freedom that I am allowed, but yet not allowed, with all of the humanity, with all of the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which is not really followed for all people, I am going to denounce and say slavery is horrible. Slavery is the greatest wrong, the greatest shame of America. Remember, this is a black man, a former slave, and he's saying, oh, I'm not going to celebrate Independence Day. Independence Day is not my day. It's white people day. It is not black people day. All right, let's look at paragraph 5. But I fancy I hear one of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. So what he's saying is some people who are against me are going to say, you know what, it's because you're too harsh on slavery that makes people not want to support your cause. Because you talk so much about it and you seem so mad, then people are not as supportive of you. Have you heard this maybe in politics before? Oh, you're kind of just a complaining like woman. You're not like strong, you're just complaining, right? If a woman tries to complain or become president or vice president, then all of a sudden she's like being naggy. But when a man says it, then it's okay. Sorry, I'm getting on my high horse. So he's saying, like, a lot of people think that I'm too harsh, but he's like, why would I not be as harsh as I am? I lived through slavery. I know how bad it is. There's nothing I can say or argue that would make anyone think slavery is not a horrible thing. He's like, all I'm doing is speaking the truth. But I submit where all is plain, there's nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On the branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that a slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. Okay, so right here is the point that he's going to be making. Oh, sorry. Must I undertake to prove that a slave is a man? Nobody doubts it. So remember in the Constitution, or sorry, the Declaration of Independence, I'll just put D of I, it says all men are created equal. So he's saying, so the only thing that people who are for slavery can argue is that a black man or a slave is not an actual man, that a black man is not a man. They're actually like an animal. They're cattle. They're no better than chickens or goats. They're not men. But he is going to prove them wrong. And he's going to say, these are all the reasons why you can't doubt that slaves are men. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death. while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded, so is admitted. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. So he's saying, when you have to make a law that says you're not allowed to teach a cow to write, then I'm going to let you go ahead and argue that a slave is not a man, that a slave is just as good as a cow. But he's saying, no, slaves can read like a man. Slaves can write like a man. Slaves have consciences like a man. So why are you thinking that they're not men? When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls in the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that a slave is a man. So he's saying, when the cattle on the hill can talk like I can talk, when the fish in the sea can talk like I can talk, when they can argue to you and distinguish that I am the same as an animal, then we can go ahead and talk that maybe a slave is not a man. But they can't. And a slave is not an animal. Paragraph 6. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave. We are called upon to prove that we are men. So he's saying we can do all of these amazing things that men can do. So why would you want us to prove that we're men? The Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. Now, why are you saying we're not men? Look at all these things that we can do. So, Black men do not have to prove they are men. Do not have to prove they are men. Based on all that they can do. They're not a beast, they're a man. So, paragraph 7. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? So he's saying if man is entitled to liberty, if man is entitled to freedom, why am I not entitled to freedom? Why am I not entitled to liberty? Just because my skin color is darker than yours? Is that why I'm not entitled to liberty? Why I'm not entitled to freedom in this great nation of America? Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his body? Because remember, slaves do not own their bodies. Slaves are owned by their white master. They're not in control of their body. You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for republics? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation? As a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans, dividing and subdividing a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom, speaking of it relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. So he's saying, there's no way I'm going to argue with you that slavery is bad, because that is making you look bad and it's making me look bad. Because I don't want to look ridiculous to even think that you would even consider that slavery is a good thing. That would make you look bad, because who would ever think that slavery is a good thing? Only a ridiculous person would. And that's what he's saying. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. So no matter if that man is black or white, no one wants to be enslaved. What am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. So he's saying he will waste no breath arguing that slavery is wrong because it is obviously wrong. So he will waste no breath arguing that slavery is wrong because it is obviously wrong. If you were to hear one of these things, to work someone without a wage, you would say that's wrong. To rob someone of liberty, that's wrong. To keep them ignorant of the relations of fellow men, that's wrong. Beat them with sticks, that's wrong. Any one of these examples, you would say that is wrong to do to any human being. Yet a slave has to endure every single thing on that list plus more. So he's saying, I'm going to waste no time to say that slavery is wrong. You know it's wrong. I know it's wrong. There's nothing about it that's right. So what then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhumane cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can, may, I cannot. The time for such argument is past. So some people make the argument that slavery is God's plan, that it's what God wants. It's why Black people were made with the black color skin and why white people were made with white color skin. They say, oh, it's because God wants it. God wants people with dark skin to be enslaved, and God wants people with light skin to enslave them. And he's saying that's blasphemy. That is completely against what God believes. So that's completely against what's in the Bible. So then he goes on. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability, I could reach the nation's ear, I would. Today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. So he's saying, we need to speak this loud. We need to speak this clear, that slavery is wrong. So the nation, the conscience, the behavior, the hypocrisy needs to be announced that slavery is bad. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that revels to him more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him, God, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There's not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States. Okay. I'm going to underline this, and I'm going to say, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? A day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year the gross injustice and cruelty which he is a constant victim. So we're going to put America is hypocritical to celebrate freedom when so many are suffering in slavery. So he's saying, how can we say we are a free nation when almost half of the people who live here are not free? How can America denounce tyrants? So those people who are leaders of other countries that rule with that iron fist that say anything I say goes, how can we denounce tyrants when we allow slave owners to be tyrants to the slave? How can we say, well, look at our great nation we are. Look what a great nation we are. Look at the liberty and equality that we share when it is not shared by everyone. So he says, at this very hour. Okay, so then that part is cut off and then it goes on to this paragraph. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. So he's saying that he knows slavery will end. He knows that's certain. There's no way that a progressed nation can remain a nation with slaves. So he has hope. He is drawing on the encouragement of the Declaration of Independence. He's saying the Declaration of Independence gives people the right to overthrow unjust laws and speak against injustice. Now, the Declaration of Independence gives white people this right, so, but not black people. In practice, black people are not given the right to speak out against injustice. They're not given the right to overthrow unjust laws. It takes many, 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 many years for this to actually happen. And even into the 1950s, the civil rights movement was needed in order to gain rights that were not just saying whites are superior to blacks. Looking at African Americans as equal to white Americans. But even in practice, that doesn't always happen. So this speech was given at a time of slavery in 1852. 100 years later, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech over 100 years later. And 150 years, we are still seeing the repercussions of slavery. So Frederick Douglass did know that the doom of slavery was going to happen, but I don't think that he could ever believe that it would take so long for African Americans to have any sort of justice and equality. So now you have to ask yourself, do you think that Frederick Douglass supports the country? Do you think Frederick Douglass supports America? Do you think he's prepared to defend America against the enemies? Do you think he's a patriot? And you're going to have to come up with reasons and examples to support your opinion on whether or not he's a patriot. Okay, that's the end of this. Sorry for being all impassioned, but impassioned speeches, they require impassioned speech. All right, hope it helped.